There it goes. It says it started. So we're here. You are live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to, I was going to say our first remote-only version of MacAdmin Monthly. We did do this once quite some time ago, and I think it was just me sitting at home talking to the void. So I'll have to find that episode and see how bad it was. But this is really kind of the real first remote-only version of MacAdmin Monthly, and I'm looking at the people who have their cameras on, and you like everyone is genuinely remote in their house. It looks like, or their home. They're not in an office, which is kind of interesting because I'm now sort of working with groups of people. So Duo has not mandatorily shut down any offices, so I never know like what I'm going to get when I join meetings. Sometimes, more often than not, it's someone at home, but it's still every now and then someone in an office, which maybe is starting to seem strange. Anyone else finding this difficult, or is this liberating for you? So if no one's going to go, I mean, for me, it's really funny because for the last 2 years, I'm a remote employee. So I work from home. So this isn't that far out of the ordinary for me. I'm not saying I never step outside the house. That's certainly not true. Particularly with spring coming, it's always nice to get out and see some sunshine and things like that. But I think if you're used to being in an office all of the time, it can possibly be strange. So anyone with thoughts on being a normal office worker and suddenly having to work from home?
Well, to me, it's kind of interesting because I also worked remotely exclusively for 3 years and before starting to work in an office. And so I've been reflecting quite a bit on, I worked from home this past week, so I've been reflecting quite a bit on that. And it's kind of interesting. I have a personality that fits well with working remote. Like, I'm just super introverted. I like being alone. It takes me a while to get focused on doing work, and then I don't like to get interrupted. So, I might, not do any work till noon, and then I might work till midnight, right? And it's perfectly fine because I'm like super focused on that. And I can't do that at work because I have a long commute. So if I don't leave on time, I don't get home on time. And so like, I like having this flexibility, but I've also been reflecting on the fact that it's only been a week and I'm already in my habit of not eating lunch on time, not eating dinner on time, not stopping working when I should, and hanging out with my family. And so like there's positive and negative aspects of this from like a personal perspective. But yeah, I imagine a lot of people are handling this very differently from how I am, just because people have different personalities. And I've been seeing a lot on Twitter, people commenting about loneliness and like, how do you cope with, all of these social things that, I don't know, some people have that need and some people don't.
Yeah. I think you bring up a number of good points there. First and foremost is just like having the personality to do it. Before coronavirus and before, before last week, essentially, right? Before people were being asked to work from home, as a remote employee, that's one of the first questions I would always get from people, like, oh, how is it working remote? And just like anything, I feel like there are pros and cons, right? And I agree with you. I have a very similar attitude that, like, if I can be left alone, yeah, just leave me alone. It's nice and quiet. I can go heads down and get a lot of work done, whether that's creating a doc or reviewing a doc or writing some code or whatever. Yeah, I'm best when, it's just nice and quiet. But it certainly does stop the high bandwidth communication of being next to a group of people and you can just point them at your screen and say, yeah, look at this thing, or help me with this, or something along those lines. But we're really sort of in the golden age or golden era. Like, we're a bunch of tech people here, and right? This is kind of our bread and butter. Like we probably, even if we're in an office, we probably work with groups of distributed people. So you're working with people in other offices, and we're all probably used to getting on video conferences for at least some portion of our day or week. And again, like we're in this golden age where we have Google Hangouts and Skype and WebEx and Zoom, right? Like we have a plethora of choices to stay connected. And I think the important thing about that is, back to the loneliness aspect, right now we think of these as business tools and something our business is using to run our business. But the nice thing is they don't have to be used that way, right? Like you could certainly set up a Monday hour block of time with your meeting, with your team, and it can just be a, hey, like, how was your weekend sort of thing. And you can kind of continue those conversations that you wouldn't have in team chat, right? Like you probably don't get in on Monday morning and ask people over chat how their weekend was or something and have this very long drawn out conversation, but you would with voice and video. So that's something I think people can do to kind of stave off the feeling of isolation. That's for sure. That's one way you can do it. But yeah, I definitely agree with the personality aspect of it. And, there is a chance of, like, Victor, you were saying, like, it's tough for you to know when to stop work. I think some people probably have the opposite problem of, like, oh, well, I'm home. I can, catch up on some of these shows and, or something along those lines. And then before you know it, you blow through the day and you're just like, what the heck did I get done? So there also is sort of a discipline to maintain. And again, I think video conferencing and even team chat can kind of help with that. Just sort of like pulls you back in, or if you're on a video conference, you have to be doing that instead of playing a game or watching a TV show or something like that. But yeah, I definitely hear you about the not knowing when to stop. I think companies are generally, at least people I've been talking to, and in my experience, have been getting better about that. Trying to help with sort of work-life balance and telling people at the end of the day, like, hey, switch off, turn off your notifications, things like that. But yeah, maybe that's just the tech aspect in all of us. We're just like, we like solving problems. That's what we like doing. And it becomes a kind of pursuit that we like chasing down.
Well, I think the remote work aspect of it actually makes that problem worse for some people. So, like, I've been at my best in terms of work-life balance the last year, where I've been working in an office. And there's an aspect, like, I've even, one of the tips that I saw on Twitter for people who have never worked remote or starting to is, like, commute to your home office, meaning, like, go walk around the block and come back inside and, like, settle down for the day. Like, that's a tip that might help some people to, like, as a strategy for getting, like, shifting from thinking about housework and family to thinking about work, right? And yeah, there's certain challenges just to that aspect that, like, your day changes completely, and you have to. And I think, like, I've certainly blown through days of work in the office where I haven't been productive. Like, I don't particularly fault people who, like, discover that they have a video game to play and they play it for a day. But I think there's, like, it just comes down to being, a responsible person eventually. Like, like if you're working and you actually get some meaning from your job and whatever, you stop doing that and you start thinking about the creative aspects of your job. So you, like, start doing that. So, blowing a day on something like that isn't a big deal, but certainly could be an adjustment for people.
Yeah. I mean, I can jump off the back of that a little bit with, when you're in an office, it's certainly not like every minute of your time in the office is just like productivity, right? Banging out code or whatever it is that you do. And I think like people need to like not be afraid to think like that when they're home as well. So like sometimes you might have like, oh, I don't have anything scheduled and, you know, I'm not in a big rush with my current project. Take a half an hour or an hour and read a new programming book or experiment with something, you know, just sort of like do your own professional development a little bit and don't worry about like just having to knock out code all the time. And definitely don't be afraid to change your, you know, online status or whatever it is that you do to let people know that you're not available. Like let them know like, yeah, I'm taking this hour for like professional development. I'm reading a new book or like I'm starting some exercises with Go or Swift or something along those lines. So it looks like all the Google people are home. Is that the word, if you can say?
There's no word.
There's no word, but you're being sensible then.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing, like the one thing that's really come up to me about the sort of all the talk about working from home and all the potential decisions about working from home is like preparedness is incredibly important. And this was not something we had thought about a month ago. What if suddenly, like, it's not, probably won't come to this, but what if suddenly, whatever your company is, you had to close all your buildings? And there could be a million reasons you'd have to do that, right? Especially if it's a company with one that's all in one building. And I don't think people don't talk about that in terms of, you know, disaster preparedness or contingency preparedness. And it's really, to me, the thing that's most highlighted in sort of doing the thought exercises behind large scale work from home. It's like, oh, you know, we've never thought about this before.
Yeah.
And like that, and even on a personal level, like I'm just not prepared to work from home for an extended period of time. Like there's all the stuff you guys are talking about, which is very important about like, you know, do I feel productive? Am I productive? And, you know, but it's also just like my home's not set up that way. You know, I'm have other things going on. There's no, it's noisy, whatever. Like that wasn't something I thought about when setting up my home, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think we mentioned it just before we went live, but it's sort of like endemic of someone that I work with, and I noticed now that he's been working from home. You know, every time we've had a meeting, like it looks like he's in a different place in his home. And I said, by the way, do you have a location or are you just from wherever? He said, well, I used to have an office, but they recently had their second child. Like, so that became his bedroom. And like, that's a huge piece of it is like what stage you're at with kids, if you have kids. And I know when I was consulting, that was a phase of my life when my kids were quite young. And you know, I didn't have an office to go to, so I tried working from home if I wasn't on site with a client. And of course, you know, little kids, you can't just tell them like, yeah, I'm here, but I'm not. So ignore me. Don't bother me. I'm working. Like that just doesn't work. So I made it a point, like I had to get out of the house and go work from somewhere. So yeah, that can be a huge piece of it. And I mean, I suspect for you, Ed, like part of it is like, having the right coffee machine, you know, did you set up a little like micro kitchen that you can go grab snacks from, things like that?
I honestly, for me, it's that we're in a temporary apartment while we renovate our real apartment, and it's very small. And I don't have little kids, but I have one teenager living with us, and they just closed my daughter's college.
Oh.
Kicking everyone off campus. So I may have two adult-sized people living here with us already, and it's going to get very crowded and very complicated.
Which also wasn't something you thought about a month ago.
Which is not something I thought about a month ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Same with me. Like, you know, I know like Columbia said they've closed and they're going to be going all remote. My daughter's school as well closed, although they're not kicking people off campus. They're just sort of telling people to stay put. I don't know how that's going to work. But like, yeah, I think the surprising thing to me is we hear of these universities that have started closing, but no high schools. I don't think I've really heard of high schools, at least in the US, closing down.
A lot of the big private high schools in New York and middle schools and grade schools in New York City have closed down.
Okay.
Public schools, like that's, if New York City at least closed their public schools, like that would be a disaster. The whole city would shut down.
Yeah.
Because that's childcare for
Yep.
2 million parents, right? Like that's incredibly important social service. Plus, educating the kids too.
The Scarsdale school district around here closed down public schools, and that's thousands of students in the suburbs.
Westchester is pretty heavily hard hit.
So I think for most businesses, I'm trying to think if it's an infrastructure challenge. I'm not really sure, because for most people, you're sending them back to their homes and they're using their own bandwidth. It's sort of like the opposite of like, hey, we're setting up an office and we're concentrating a bunch of people and now we need tons of bandwidth here. This is sort of the opposite. You're pushing everyone out and saying like, yeah, you have an internet connection, go use it. Whether people's personal internet connections are up to the task, that's sort of outside of, I think, the scope of a lot of.
It's assuming a Beyond Corp model. There's a lot of businesses that need VPNs, and I'm sure those are being overloaded right now. Everyone goes and works from home.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. I was going to say, like, this is sort of like the ultimate Beyond Corp, right? Everyone is going Beyond Corp and outside of the office. And yeah, we've probably talked about that at a previous MacAdmin Monthly, but now sort of being very much in that space. And when I go talk to businesses about Beyond Corp or Zero Trust models, like so many, I guess I'm surprised that there are still so many that like it's a new concept to them. So that's first off. And even the ones who have heard of it very often say like, oh yeah, we'd like to implement this, but it's a long road, right? It's years worth of change and updates for a business to implement something like that very often. So yeah, you're definitely right. A lot of companies will still require VPNs, and well, let's see how those fare. I think if you are sort of a global company, you probably have VPN endpoints around the world, hopefully already. That's not to say that those won't start to get overloaded, but you're at least slightly in a better situation. What other infrastructure? Oh, sorry, go.
Well, tying it back to like the preparedness plan, like we use Beyond Corporate, and I take my laptop to work and I connect to the guest Wi-Fi, and it's the same as at home. But there is other people who only have an iMac, right, or a workstation. There's also graphic designers and people who work with very, very large files, right? And you have to, like, just because the internet connection is good, and just because access over the internet is good, it doesn't necessarily allow everybody to work from home, especially if they're not prepared to do that, right? So if everybody had an iMac at home, or if everybody had a second MacBook or something, maybe they could, but not everybody does. So suddenly you're in a rush to provision those, or you're trying to figure out how to deal with large assets for people who edit movies and Premiere or something. And I think it takes a lot of preparation to be able to effectively work remote as a company.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, as work remotely as a company, and not just, because for most of us, we need a browser and a terminal and an IDE, and we're we're pretty set. And it doesn't take a lot to get that off the ground. But yeah, there are definitely people in situations where they have a very specific setup to get their job done. Like you said, particularly video editors or other graphic artists that deal with larger files. And They need Photoshop and the larger monitor and whatever else, or at least those are the things that will make them much more productive. Like, yeah, you can run Premiere or Photoshop on a laptop, but it might not be the best experience.
I would even go as far to say, like, if you're the non-technology workers in your business, you probably haven't been giving them an internet reimbursement, right? Like, you really can't count on them having bandwidth enough to do their jobs from home. Like,
True.
I mean, you can sort of assume everyone has internet access, but that's a pretty big assumption, and whether it's good enough, whatever that means, is really, questionable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what I was alluding to before. I think
Yeah.
everyone probably has a connection. Whether it's enough of a connection is sort of the real issue. But I'm not entirely sure how in scope that is for a company. But
well, I think
that said, it is now.
yeah, I mean, I think it's in scope. If this is something you need to prepare for, it's in scope. Like, if you're you can't, it's unreasonable to say, like, we'll just rely on employees to provide the following assets to the company in case we have to work from home. Like, you have to be prepared in advance to provide your employees with all the things that they need to do to get their jobs done. And that may include internet access. And actually, something that another manager at Google said, which I hadn't thought of, which I thought was very insightful, is like, there's also a huge amount of privilege involved in all of this.
Yeah.
Like, we're making a lot of assumptions, like, about people's status, their home status, their ability to pay for internet access, their ability to suddenly work from home. Like, and we're, other people who are in the room when we're talking about this, like, we're all privileged enough to, like, yeah, we can make it work. But that's not true for everybody,
Absolutely.
And that's a very important consideration. Like, you have to be supporting the people who need to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that kind of goes back to what you're saying with, the assets that people need to do their job. Well, I guess that's really in scope for, like, all of your employees, whether you think they can, afford those things on their own or not,
Right.
Yeah, we had, when I was working remotely, where everybody was working remotely, we had a budget for the home office, and now this is a 16-inch, so it's got a good microphone. But like, investing in a good headset makes these meetings go much better. And we realized that after everybody had crappy connections and we were on video chat all day, right? So internet and things like that. So that got included. Like, you could expense it. Things like second monitor you could expense. But the interesting thing about the internet is we actually had it, like, to work at this company, you need to have good internet. That was, like, one of the things. You work remotely, but yeah. So you could expense a phone because you were getting paged on the phone, but your home internet was a requirement. And yeah, I guess everybody can approach that differently.
Was that part of the interview process? By the way,
no, it was part of the, I think, recruiting, and
send us a screenshot of you running fast.com.
Yeah.
Well, decades ago. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say decades ago, I was working for Apple, and they kicked us out of the office very suddenly. Basically, Monday, they told us Wednesday we had to all be home officed because of money reasons. Like, they didn't want to extend the lease or something. And their policy was, like, they gave you a home office payment. It didn't matter what you spent it on. It was a one-time payment. Like, and it was reasonable. It was like $1,000. Like, just, you can have $1,000 to spend on anything for home office. It can be a rug. Like, we don't care. But this is all you're getting. Don't ever come back. And it was kind of funny, but it worked out okay.
So what did you buy?
Yes, gonna ask, what did you spend yours on?
I bought an inkjet printer, a cabinet, and a chair, I think.
Nice.
I think that's all. Yeah. I still have the cabinet.
All important things.
All important things.
What else? Victor, you mentioned like seeing advice on Twitter. Like, we don't need to go into wash your hands and don't touch your face. And like, there's definitely enough of that. There's enough of that advice floating around, and it's all reasonable, and we all try to follow that. But as far as, technology, like, I'm not entirely sure where we can help much beyond, helping people get set up at home and making sure they have access to good video conferencing applications. I know, well, let's start with Hangouts, right? Like, Hangouts, I would largely consider sort of like the gold standard of video conferencing. Like, it runs on everything. It's a great experience. I'm trying to think. You need a G Suite account. Other than that, I don't think there are any restrictions.
And Google also sent out a public announcement saying that they're extending the expensive G Suite version to everybody till the end of June, I think.
Nice.
So that's a rollout that's happening. I was my girlfriend's a teacher, and I was watching her yesterday. They were doing a Chromebook test for work from home because all their students get Chromebooks, and they are preparing for this situation. So they had 20 teachers get into a Hangout session and trying to figure out how everything worked, and just really do a load test on the whole thing and see how far they could take it. And it went really well. I was surprised with my MacBook here. They're on $200 Chromebooks, and they had a lot of people in there, and they were able to do video, the document editing and the presentation. And the thing that actually surprised me the most is probably because we don't use it at work much, but the chat feature actually has transcription, so you get live subtitles of what everybody is saying, and they're really good.
Yeah, I tried that the other day out of curiosity. I was in a Hangout with someone, and there was the little closed caption button, and I hit it, and it does a pretty good job. Of course, it was a very technical conversation, so there are just some words it's not going to easily pick up on. It was a conversation, and we kept talking about authentication, but the person talking about it kept saying auth, so I forget what the closed captioning kept picking up as auth. It was really close, but I couldn't really get a few words. But overall, the closed captioning was excellent.
And if you needed it, you'd be pretty happy it was there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I turn it on when I'm bored in meetings, and I find once it's on, I can't pay attention to the actual meeting because I'm just looking for the things oh, that's funny. But it's actually an incredibly useful feature for people who actually.
Yeah. So just quickly back to. Victor, what you said, Google said they were extending the more expensive version of Hangouts to everyone through June. I'm not entirely sure what that entails. Is that just more participants per meeting, or what's the gist of that?
I think the number of people you can have in a meeting is much larger. And I don't actually know. It's probably a lot of stuff that we take for granted at work because we already have it.
Right. I know you're not a product person, which is why I was asking if you know.
No, I know that definitely the number of participants is the biggest probably limiting factor for people.
And as far as I've read, it's that you can record the sessions and have the recording available to all the attendees.
Yeah, that's excellent too. Yeah, thank you, Henry. So yeah, recording sessions, all these little extra features. I know WebEx announced something similar. They're sort of letting people for free get to a higher tier of WebEx. So if you're already a WebEx user or need to communicate with someone who's a WebEx user, I know they did something similar where you get more at the free level, which is great. There's Zoom, if anyone's a Zoom user. I don't know in particular if they made any announcements around using it, but I think Zoom has always been up to 40 minutes for free. You don't have to have an account, or not an account, but you don't have to have some special contract with Zoom to do that. Skype, I guess if you're a Microsoft person, you probably have Skype.
Isn't that Teams nowadays?
What's that?
I think it's Teams nowadays. So everybody is using Teams. As far I'm invited to a lot of Teams meetings, and this totally replaced Skype for Business.
Okay. I've definitely heard of Microsoft Teams, but I thought that was a chat thing. Because I was just about to say, like, there's Skype, but I haven't looked at Skype in probably...
Teams
15.
actually picked up very much. So you even can allow remote control. So it can be a help desk situation, and you have 2 mouse pointers, and your avatar is next to your mouse pointer. So it's I don't like everything, but it's quite rich in the features.
Okay, interesting.
Slack has some of that same capability too. I remember Slack actually acquired one of the first company that invented, I think it was called Screen Hero or something, but it was the ability to have multiple cursors and all that. So if you have the enterprise version of Slack, if you're paying for it, I should say, then you can do video conferencing and video chat and screen sharing.
But one thing that I think, especially with the situation right now, I think tomorrow or today, there's the Objective by the Sea conference, and small conference. Most attendees have arrived on site, I guess. So it's a real conference. Next week, there's Troopers in Germany, and it happens. But today, there was an announcement that in 2 weeks, there should be in London the MacAd UK, and this is just postponed to a different day. So the effect on the conference and that kind of meetings is something we will see how this goes in the next months and the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's actually a good transition. That was something I was going to bring up about conferences and these sort of big gatherings canceling. I mean, let's cut to the chase on Apple WWDC. I can't see that they do not cancel it or postpone it. There was that one oddball year where they did it in August. Like, I don't know. I can't see Apple not postponing or canceling it altogether. And quite honestly, I think they're in a good position to do that. I know people will, gripe about, labs, we need the labs. And they're kind of right. But for the vast majority of content at WWDC, like I've been watching videos from WWDC for the last number of years. They don't allow Q&A in the sessions. So Apple could easily produce those videos and all of that content without an audience, I think, and in some ways that might even be better. Like they could get like a real close up of people and demos, and then they would also avoid those awkward pauses where speakers are looking for applause but no one knows to applaud. I think that's become a thing at WDC, but yeah, in my opinion, it's like Apple should just cancel it or postpone it. But that is sort of a thought. I was talking to Patrick from Mac Sysadmin, and I said, wow, it's nice to be an end of the year conference, particularly in this year, isn't it? Right? Like, hopefully this won't be an issue by then. But there is the fear, of course, of all these beginning of the year conferences canceling and postponing to October, November, and then we just have this, pile up of conferences in the end of the year. So we'll see how that works, and then you just have to kind of pick your conference. But yeah, the effect on conferences is very real, and I definitely appreciate conferences that are going virtual only. And I think that's cool. And it provides some routine for people, like some normalcy. But at the same time, like that's really hard on a conference organizer because, they've probably rented a venue and may or may not get their money back for the venue. And of course, from an attendee standpoint, you're missing the hallway conversations, which honestly, for me, that's the reason I go to conferences. It's not so much for the sessions as much as it is for all the social activities and the meeting with people and people I've met before or people I want to meet and haven't met yet. So I don't know. It's definitely going to be an interesting thing to watch. Anyone else thinking about conferences and how that affects them? Has anyone had conference travel canceled?
I had to cancel the trip to London, so because I was supposed to speak in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
it's a 1 hour flight, so it's an easy thing. But the people who are or who wanted to attend from much further away, of course, they are affected by having prepaid flights of long distance flights and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You mentioned Objective by the Sea, and it feels like they just snuck in under the wire, right? Like if it was another week or two, they might have had to have postponed or canceled. But I've definitely seen, all the people on Twitter that I follow that attend, they're all hopping on planes and showing up at this event. I don't know. Maybe they'll host it outside.
I am curious. There's a lot of we can't fly because of travel restrictions that are company specific. I'm wondering how many other people are affected by that kind of cancellation. Okay.
Me, definitely me. So I mean, it's I can't get too mad at it, right? Like it's a reasonable thing to do. Definitely, I feel healthy and, all those things, but I wouldn't want to carry it back to another population of people. So, these large gatherings. I mean, I don't think I can feel bad about anything getting canceled anymore if Dublin canceled their St. Patrick's Day parade. It's right. It's the most iconic thing I can think of that gets canceled. But I think they said, close to 500,000 people show up. So probably makes sense to not have a gathering of 500,000 people in close proximity. So, yeah, I mean, we talked about schools closing and conferences canceling, the travel industry. Yeah, definitely getting hit kind of hard by all this. So, bye, Tom. I see on the chat, Brandon says external conferences canceled for me or moved to remote. So yeah, definitely affecting people. But yeah, when they get moved to remote, they're using video conferencing, whether that's, broadcasting on Twitch or YouTube or, some other manner. It's sort of like, we can do this because we have the technology to do it.
Yeah, I'm very curious with tools like Twitch and things like that, whether we're going to come to for telecommuting, for a lot of us, it's gotten so good that we can work from home. Conferences have a whole bunch of other aspects to them that I feel compelled to fly across the country to go to a conference, even though I've been feeling conscious about the fact that I'm just flying to have a few beers with people, right? And it's I'd love to see some innovation in that space and some sort of somebody doing a very successful online only conference. And then maybe that means doing a conference of 10 people only or something. I'm also that's the one aspect that also scares me about WWDC, because they can probably do the keynotes and all the presentations well. With the labs, I'm worried that what's going to happen is that Apple is going to select a small group of people from these kind of developers and these kind of developers and have very private events with them.
That's what WWDC is now.
Right. But I'm saying the labs, there's a certain aspect of the labs where people go in and meet with engineers and publicly ask questions. Anybody who, even though it's restricted in terms of the lottery and everything, it's still kind of free form once you're there. Versus Apple also sometimes has the tendency of inviting people to private events, and I'm worried that it's all just going to become private events where this person, or like you have a very good relationship with Apple around this product, and so you get to sit down with the engineers versus everybody else doesn't.
Well, I mean, I think it's right. Like that's also largely what happens now, very often. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you about hopping on a plane to have a few beers with people, but that there's definitely value there. I think there's a lot of value there to have, you know, in-person communication with people is like, it's really important. So, and yeah, we hop on a plane to go do that. So I don't know what to, that's how you do it, right? Like you have this gathering in one spot and you have to travel to it.
I mean, I actually think if this disaster, whatever you want to call it, leads Apple to redeveloping WWDC in a way where it's inclusive, and then maybe like all the lab time and becomes, you know, engineer AMAs or whatever, and everything's online, and it's not just the whatever 12% of people who randomly get tickets, but actually includes the entire developer community, that would be a huge improvement. Like, I personally think WWDC is broken, and I love when I'm there, but when I'm not there, I think it's really kind of messed up.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's been broken for a while, but
yeah,
they have made great strides in getting videos day of the event, and like I think they've covered or they've kind of papered over a lot of the brokenness in a lot of ways. Like you know, I attended WWDC for a long time, and I remember when, you know, they started hitting their attendee thresholds, and it was difficult to get tickets, and they, you know, the lottery and whatnot. And then I started not getting tickets. And in the initial days, that was really frustrating. But once they got into the rhythm of being able to release videos day of, I just still scoped out the time that week to pretend I was attending the conference. You know, end of the day, just sort of pick which, you know, 1, 2, or 3 videos or sessions were most important to me, and I would watch those, and I would just scope out the time to do that. You know, of course, I missed the social interaction and whatnot, but it was certainly better than just missing out and hearing, you know, tales of what happened seep out over time. The other interesting thing about WWDC, because they hit that threshold and there are so many more people that want to attend, there's this whole ecosystem of conferences and events that have grown up around the people that aren't going to WWDC but want to show up in San Jose, you know, San Francisco before that, but now San Jose. So I know there's AltConf and Layers Conference and maybe a few others. And then, of course, there's, you know, usually an event with, you know, a band or something. And like, I presume they've all canceled, like, and saying like, it's just too uncertain for them to make any plans. You know, Apple leaves people hanging long enough to make their WWDC plans anyway, but you can be pretty sure it's happening. This year, you know, there's a whole other factor of uncertainty. So of course, if I was doing one of those conferences, I would absolutely announce like, it's just not happening this year. Like just trying to get space and whatnot. So cool. I know the Penn State people said something on Twitter that like they're still on, but they're monitoring the situation. So I think that's early June. So they have, 2-3 months to kind of figure it out, I guess.
I applied to speak at Penn State, so
nice.
I'm waiting for something in there.
Yeah.
But just in case, if many of those events have been canceled, I think the community will just find ways to compensate. And if you see what the University of Utah, they have the remote MacAdmin meeting monthly thing, which is a format that exists for long. And so I think a similar thing can at least compensate those conferences that are not about to happen. And there's new technology where even doing a live presentation of another system is possible with a game streaming devices. So of course the speakers have to be equipped with that.
Right.
But besides having a traveling budget, I think then it's a technology budget again. But there has to be a delivery person handing it over to you. So, and if the whole chain is broken,
maybe you can get your deliveries and then just leave them sit for a few days before you open them up.
Okay.
Wear gloves or something. I don't know. Cool. I think we covered a lot there. I don't. Does anyone have any other questions or thoughts on remote working? Yeah, go.
I think Henry nailed it, that at least in this community, if like all of these events that we rely on get canceled, we're going to figure something out. And like I participate in bi-weekly office hours for OSquery, and I know there's other projects that are able to do that kind of stuff. Like I think we might start seeing more of that. I've seen folks advertising personal like office hours. So folks who would, go to a conference and speak on a topic or something because they're, an expert on it or something, they might instead choose to say, put something in my calendar and like have, some slots here and there, and things like that I'm excited to see if those things grow.
Yeah, I agree. I always talk about the MacAdmin community and its resourcefulness and kindness, and like I think, that will definitely help all of this be easier for people. So like, certainly no one's getting upset at conferences for having to cancel. I think everyone is understanding, and it was news to me when you said MacDuck postponed. I didn't see that announcement, but like it makes perfect sense, and I'm sure they'll be fine with the community because of that. Like everyone gets it. So cool. Any other questions or thoughts on remote working, video conferencing technology? Questions about Mac management?
Just a quick maybe survey of the room. We have this conversation once in a while here where we talk about whether you would recommend somebody a Mac versus an Apple device. I'm wondering, our Macs are actually good or better devices for working remotely or not? Is there something specific about Macs that makes them better or worse?
Well, I will say one thing right away, and that's internet recovery. That is such a fantastic feature, and I did have to use that very recently. So, that's great. I don't think Windows has an equivalent, or maybe I'm wrong, but whether that's a unique advantage or just something that Mac does really well, I think that's great.
Well, not only that, but depending upon your environment, we would use a Jamf backend, and if you use Apple's depth service, an end user theoretically could internet recovery, restore their machine. It would auto roll back into an MDM, and then provide them with their work tools again.
Yeah, exactly. If you have some way of delivering your management agent that then bootstraps everything else to an end user, they can internet recover their own device and sort of be back up and running.
And we recently have been involved in consulting a larger organization in just building out partially areas of their modern client. And it's supposed to be just that if something is wrong, they just go for internet recovery, and then the bootstrapping, including user certificates and everything to VPN into the company, is just about half an hour setup, including all the Office applications. And it's nothing unique, but there have been a few challenges, and it's interesting to see that working right now, including the security concerns the company had.
Anything else that makes Macs better? I see in the chat, Brandon says, from a support perspective, absolutely internet recovery. I don't think Microsoft has a standard solution, but maybe specific vendors do. Not sure. Yeah, I don't know the Microsoft side, but yes, I'm glad to see someone else calling out internet recovery. I don't know. Like, I think I know people kind of make fun of it, but the whole idea of like, it just works. And people like point to some like esoteric things that may or may not work. But I will say, again, I don't know if Windows has caught up or not, but using a Mac in general, it just works, right? Like if I have a printer at home, it's going to be super easy to connect to that printer and have the system go out and download drivers. Using a second monitor or even hooking up via HDMI, maybe to a television set or something, like generally it just works. Like I think you'll have good experience with those interactions as well as you're trying to get comfortable and find comfortable space at home using a Mac. So I think those are good advantages as well. Maybe is there anything about remote support that makes a Mac better than a Windows machine? Because that's another challenge, right? When people start going remote, just the support of those people. I don't know. It's a good question. I know like screen sharing's built in, but of course that requires some infrastructure in place.
I think actually that may be an area where the Mac is not as good as Windows.
Yeah, maybe.
Like that's the kind of thing that they're good at. The one thing I would say also that Mac is good for, which is just extending what you just said about it just works, is like also if you're looking for flexibility about assets, like if you support Catalina, you support every Mac. Like that's something you have to worry so much about on any other platforms. Like, do we have the drivers for this Dell, the sound card in this Dell laptop? Do we have the drivers for this Ethernet port on this Lenovo laptop? Like just being able to say like anything with an Apple logo on it running a Mac OS, we can support it. We may not like it, but we can support it. That's a big deal. So that makes flexibility in situations where you need flexibility much, much easier.
Yeah. I can agree with that. Okay. Last call for questions on any topic. All right. This will probably be the first month that we're not going to wrap up with upcoming events, but thanks everyone for joining today. We will be back next month, possibly with some people in person or possibly remote again. This worked out okay, so no complaints, right? All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Take care.
Bye.
All right.